Jamie?
Great. Thanks, Peter. Good to see you all tonight. Thanks for having me. First, a check on technology. Can you all see a full screen version of the first slide? Yeah, okay. So yes, as Peter said, I'm Jamie Powers. I use he, him pronouns. I've been effectively the program manager since the end of 2024, and I've been with the climate program since the beginning of 2023. Um, And yes, tonight I've been asked to give you a rundown of what's gone on in fiscal year 26. And just for your awareness, the fiscal years in the county, if you're not aware, are July 1st to June 30th every year. So the first part of the presentation will cover July 2025 to June 2026. Then I was asked to present some about what is planned for this fiscal year, FY27, which started last month, goes until next June, and to talk a little bit about community engagement in climate action. And so I'll spend some time there as well. And as Peter mentioned, I'm happy to hang around for whatever conversation you all want to have at the end of that. Randy, it's good to see you in a different context, sir. Yep, here's the agenda. I'll provide a little bit of context. The context, I imagine most or all of you are pretty well aware of, but just for any of your YouTube viewers out there, just so that we're kind of operating from the same understanding. So, globally speaking, emissions continue to climb. This is not a future issue that we're dealing with. We are feeling the impacts here and now, some more than others, including in our own community. Um, Unless we get a pretty aggressive handle on how to equitably address global emissions, pretty quickly, these impacts are generally going to become worse and less predictable over time. I'm listening to the conversation as we're getting started here and like thinking about other parts of the world and how Europeans are thinking about X, Y, and Z and, you know, events in the Middle East. And I would just make sure that folks um, are clear that this is not a political issue. This is a scientific reality. And it is true that in the US, it is a highly politicized issue. And with that, I understand that it tends to be, more comfortable for folks who are on the political left to have some of these conversations. But it is also, hopefully a welcome to anybody out there who's part of this call or watching on YouTube afterwards that like your ideology doesn't matter. We need you in this fight. So have a conversation with folks that are working on this stuff and become part of that effort. And the last thing I'll say in terms of the global context is, this can seem like a really big problem to tackle. I don't need to tell you all that. You've been tackling it for a very long time. And in that context, I'd like to remind people that the globe is ultimately made up of communities like ours who are doing better and better, and who, through that effort, have lessons to teach other communities and other places. Not all good lessons, but lessons nonetheless about how we did this, how we didn't do that. And, hopefully all of us can be learning from each other to make the whole global picture a little bit better, a little bit faster. Nationally, again, probably doesn't need much explanation. With the current administration, there's been regression on all things climate policy, all things, a lot of which relate to the root causes of the climate crisis, which is problematic because, from my perspective, climate change is not the problem that we need to be focused on. It is a symptom of a set of problems, many of which are being exacerbated right now in our country. And I'll circle back to that a little later on. But it does provide this opportunity with, every headline I read where damage is being done to our social infrastructure and our environmental ecosystems. those are opportunities to bring new people into the movement and have a new conversation and make a new connection, so that we can be working together en masse to build the communities that we want to be. So as much as these are really trying times, a lot of doors are opening up to new people who haven't really thought about, working with folks like us on this call tonight. And I encourage all of us to, think about that perspective as we do the engagement work and the community building around this topic. So FY26. The main focus of the climate program in FY26 was this list of board-funded projects. I don't need to go too in the weeds. I think many of you either have already received the slides or you will receive the slides. Obviously, we'll have a video to review. But ultimately, we had, thanks to $150,000 contribution from housing, the housing department of the county, a total of about $750,000 to use toward climate efforts. You can see the list of those projects here. Several of them involve the Local Energy Alliance Program, or LEAP. So there was a big focus on residential energy improvements, energy efficiency, changing out of equipment upgrades, roof repairs so that they could get solar on their roof, all that sort of stuff. Not a ton happening in the commercial sector, not a ton happening in the transportation sector, which is our biggest source of territorial emissions. It's about half of our emissions come from the transportation sector. One sort of ongoing success story is the Energy Resource Hub, number 3 on this list. And that is an opportunity where community members, whether you be a business or a homeowner, can go to the energyresourcehub.org and connect with the Energy Navigator to figure out if there are any incentives that you can take advantage of. Those could be local, those could be utility based, those could be state. Not much to speak of in terms of federal anymore, as many of you know, but those things are all ideas that you could explore with the Energy Resource Hub and really sort of take advantage of. And there's a word I'm missing right now, when you leverage some other funding or other opportunities to do things that you were thinking about doing anyway at your home or business. We are in the process of finishing up a few of these projects. For example, Climate Action Collaboration Initiative. While we have spent most of that money, we bought, for example, an EUTV, electric UTV for our parks department. We spent about 18 grand, 19 grand planting trees out in Crozet. We are still in the process of finalizing a purchase of 1 or 2 e-bikes for county staff so that county staff, if they have a meeting, not too far from the county office building, instead of hopping in their car, they can hop on a bike and go over that way. It'll have storage for your laptop, all that sort of stuff. And then the remaining funds we're going to be using in a contribution to Charlottesville Community Bikes to continue to strengthen our cycling community. So that's what's left of the Climate Action Collaboration Initiatives. In the Resilient Together Climate Resilience Cohort, and as a reminder, that was an effort to try to directly connect through local nonprofits with communities that have been marginalized throughout planning processes for as long as there have been government, right? So most local and other governments, they have public meetings at certain times that are really usually only convenient if you have the luxury of working one job and have reliable transportation, reliable childcare, all that sort of stuff. So we wanted to make sure that we were hearing from those voices that aren't usually heard as we pull together a resilience plan. And so that effort, we've spent a bunch of that money, and we still have a plan to put before them, like a draft plan to put before those organizations so they can review and provide feedback to us. The only other thing I'll give a special call out to, because it's got a an important place in my heart is the Climate Summit, which would fall under the number seven, Outreach and Education, where we pulled together high school students from across the county who are in advanced placement environmental science classes. And we did a really deep dive such that those students were able to have a more nuanced perspective on the climate crisis and understand some of the systems at play and could ask some really deep questions about how we go about addressing the crisis over the long term. So we weren't trying to go into a room and then come out and everybody's got the problem solved because that's not realistic. But we did want them to know the problem at a deeper level. And that's something we're going to be repeating this year. So super excited about that. So I will leave this slide behind us for the moment. These are some of the results of the work in FY26. So you can see our reduced emissions, about 350. These things are all really tough to estimate in real time. And so we do our biannual GHG emissions inventory, where even that is imperfect, but it allows us to have kind of a better handle on, at a community level, how are we doing on meeting the board's targets of getting to zero net emissions by 2050. And so treat this as like, a horse farm grain of salt, this 350, but maybe it's ballpark. We had some resilience events with the cohort. I mentioned the climate summit. You see the number of homes and businesses served by our partners, particularly through the Energy Resource Hub. We also funded the climate action kits again, and this year, I'll say a little bit more about this, but we're looking to have a conversation about whether we can do something a little bit more strategic with those climate action kits. We did change lighting at 4 county firehouses and 1 building down at the Yancey Community Center, which helped with energy efficiency in those places. And I mentioned the EUTV, which was actually just delivered yesterday, I think, to Parks. So it's been a long time coming, but there we are. All right, so I'm going to leave FY26 for now. That's a summary. FY27, these are the stated objectives of the Facilities and Environmental Services Department in terms of climate work. And so the program is to be results oriented, is to lead by example. So when we think about the types of projects the county wants to be doing, it is, focus on county first and then help support with community initiatives after that. If possible, capture the savings from like energy efficiency improvements in county buildings and have some of the money saved cycle back into the climate program. That's kind of a wish list item right now. That's not really on the table for FY27, but is something that the department is trying to focus on. We want to build momentum through strategic pilots. So you'll see a list of some things that we are trying out for the first time this year, in the hopes that they can gain some initiative and keep on going. And of course, improve our reporting and improve our performance and capacity in the program. The FY27 emissions reduction plan. So the FES, the Facilities Environmental Services, recently published a department plan for this year. The goal, as stated in terms of climate action, is a 5% reduction from county buildings. This gives you a sense of what that amounts to toward our 2050 target. And once all of those programs that our board funded are up and running, then we will be able to hopefully focus on some other strategic initiatives that aren't board funded and just require staff time. So here are the board funded projects. We presented these, Jeff Dumars and Greg presented these to the board in May. So it seems like the standard allocation or standard appropriation for climate work for the next couple of years anyway is going to be $300,000. And we were already getting and will continue to get $100,000 in operational funds. And that's a lot of mumbo jumbo for just saying that we planning on $400,000 a year for the next few years because it all goes into the same pool of money. We pull, whether it's a project or whether I have to buy pens or markers, it all comes out of the same money essentially. Um, so here are some of the projects that we have on our list for this year. There's a few where, the city has been or was about to start a certain type of program, but it was only available to city businesses or city residents. And they kept getting calls from county residents, county businesses saying, "Hey, can I take advantage of that?" And the answer was always no, because you're not in the city. It didn't make a lot of sense to me that our community, which is pretty tight knit, most people don't even know where the city county line is, that you should have members of our community who have access to a program and some that don't have access to a program. So we wanted to try to match what the city was doing with some of these funds, and we got approval for doing that. So we've got a commercial energy efficiency program funded at $50,000. That is new to the city. They've kicked theirs off, and we are still working through the process of getting ours up and running. Residential energy efficiency, the city had that last year. It was wildly successful. And so we will also be copying that $50,000. The city is, just for clarity, they're investing more money in these things. We are trying to fit within this, the allotted budget and make sure that's a meaningful amount of money to get something done as a pilot. Another business opportunity for county businesses is going to be EV charging infrastructure as long as it's publicly available. So this again will be at a $50,000 investment level. And it's not going to pay for a full charger. Those things are super expensive. But for a level 3 charger, we could contribute up to $10,000. And for a level 2 charger, contribute up to $4,000, just like the city's been doing. And so we know we have some built-in audiences for these programs in the county because of the calls that the city's been getting. So we're excited that there will already be a little bit of momentum at the beginning of these, whenever we're able to kick them off. And the final one that we're still matching with the city, so this is not new, this is a third year that we're working with the city on this. That's the Energy Resource Hub, which I talked about earlier, the ERH. We're going to continue to work with LEAP separately as through something that we call the Energy Smart program, which is where they support homeowners in some of the ways that I mentioned before: energy efficiency, appliance upgrades, getting roofs to be solar ready, even helping out where like some emergency repairs might be needed in order to do the energy work. So we're excited to keep that work going. That's been going on for more than a decade now. The micro infrastructure work for this year, that is essentially responding to like a query we got at the Active Mobility Summit around the opportunity to build a bridge that would connect a residential area to either a school area or a commercial area, such that residents in that residential area could go on bike or foot and skip the car ride to go do whatever they needed to do. So we've looked at a few different potential sites in the county. We haven't settled on anything yet, and we're still in the process of kind of narrowing that in. But essentially, whether it's a bridge or whether it's an improvement of some sort of bike ped infrastructure so that it actually leads to fewer people in cars, that's what we're trying to do with that. We'll be funding that at $70,000. Commuter incentives is going to be a program just for county staff for this year. It's going to be funded very modestly, $5,000. And oh, and I should mention, I think I skipped this. The Energy Resource Hub this year, last year was 63,000. This year is going to be 75,000. So we're upping our investment there. And so yeah, commuter incentives is 5,000. That's essentially going to be modeled in part on Wahoo Commute, which is UVA's commuter incentive program, where if you do a certain type of different transportation options. So instead of driving yourself, you carpool or you take a bike to work. That automatically is assigned with a certain amount of money for that day, right? And it's usually, a couple bucks per day, but you do that over the course of the year, and then hopefully you can get a kind of a meaningful stipend into your paycheck. Cobb 5 Solar is something we kicked off a couple of years ago. That continues. We're in the engineering part now. There's all these sort of site visits, and we do anticipate solar to be on the roof by spring of next year. Finally, there's all the outreach kind of stuff and the climate summit I've talked about. We're going to be doing that again. We have more money for that, so we're going to be enhancing it, making it a little bit more enjoyable, both for the adult volunteers and for the students. Party for the Planet and the climate kits we've been supporting. We're going to continue to support that. We haven't supported the Active Mobility Summit in the past. Some county departments have, and we're going to be kicking some money in to make that a um, better showing this year from county funds. There are strategic projects kind of on a list that, as capacity and authorization happen, that we can spend some money or spend some time, not some money, excuse me, here. I'm currently working on the inventory. That's a requirement of the Climate Action Plan. We were doing it annually for a few years, but I did not receive authorization to do a 2023. So we skipped that year and we're going right to 2024. And we're going to probably continue just the biannual inventories in that way. Some of these you've all heard about in the past. One thing that's new on my mind is, given how much the budget is a topic of conversation with the board, wanting to think about how we can be proactive about revenue generation schemes that could end up helping to fund climate work at a greater level or in a different way than is currently being funded. So that's something that I'm going to be doing some looking into this year. Skipping around a little bit, I think there's some good conversations around the rural area plan and the data collection that's happening now. And one of the things that I'm trying to impress upon my colleagues in the county is the importance of thinking about this argument that we often hear in the rural area that, maybe the climate program or climate activists or somebody wants to blanket the county in solar panels. And I want to make sure that that rumor is killed sufficiently. We have done some investigation into like what our clean energy options are. Solar is the best option for our area. There's a little bit of geothermal, a little bit of wind potential, but for the most part, it's solar. And even if we want to like provide 100% of our energy in 2050 with solar projects, and we cover every single parking lot and building in the county with solar panels, that still only will get us about halfway to our energy needs. So we are definitely going to need lands in the rural area to have solar panels on them. There are different mechanisms for that to kind of be a thing, whether it's one of those 21-acre plots of land, whether that is utility scale solar, whether that's eventually community scale solar. But solar definitely needs to be part of the rural landscape in our county. And it's not a ton of land, right? Like, I don't remember the exact calculation, but it's under 5% of the rural lands would need to have solar for us to meet our energy needs fully from solar. That does not account for battery storage. And so there's a whole other conversation that needs to be part of this rural area planning where we're thinking about the least negative areas to have solar panels and battery storage. And battery storage most likely is either paired with the panels in question or it is, utility scale battery storage facility. And so there's some analysis we need to do to understand what that impact is. But I do think we need to have honest conversations about what it means to have a clean energy future and a rural landscape, and possibly redefining what rural means for our county. So that's an important conversation to have. I think a lot of this stuff is fairly familiar, but we can cover it in Q&A if we need to. The question came up, what's going on with the adaptation resilience plan? The short answer is I don't know. I'm not involved in the adaptation resilience plan any longer. Um, what I know is that the Facilities and Environmental Services Department director has hired a consultant to essentially socialize the draft materials with county leadership and develop a plan for how, or maybe develop a strategy for how we can get to a plan. And then there will be another contract for somebody to take that strategy and implement it. Might be the same consultant, it might not be. Um, that is That's essentially what I know right now. I haven't got an update in a while. And so if this is a particular topic of interest to anybody on the call or watching the video, I recommend reaching out to Jeff Dumars to find out more. He is attending periodic Resilient Together meetings, but that's about what I know. The last thing I wanted to touch on is community engagement. This is hugely important for this work, as you all know. And I said earlier that the climate crisis is not the thing. It's just a symptom of our sickness, which is caused by a bunch of problematic ways that humans show up in the world, right? Um, the only way to really address the climate crisis is to shift some very powerful systems from the way they work now to new ways of working. And I know a lot of you are involved in that system shifting in different ways, right? Not just in this conversation. So I just wanted to kind of hammer home that like that's the work, actually. It's if we do that well, the climate crisis cannot but kind of work itself out over time. Um, Given how entrenched and powerful these systems are, and some of them we were talking about at the beginning of this call, or you all were talking about at the beginning of the call, the only way we can do that is through mass mobilization, right? So when we think about some of the root causes that lead us as society to want AI in our lives, right? That's a huge problem, I would argue, particularly from a looking at it through a climate lens. I think, the arguments for data centers as a uh, diverse revenue source for local communities is a huge problem from a climate perspective, right? But they're not the problem. The problem is why we want AI and why we want data centers, right? And so we need to be talking deeply and broadly with lots of different organizations, lots of different sub communities within the county, within the city, and even beyond our borders and hitting many different interest areas. I think one thing that came up for me, it's anecdotal, but there was, a climate activist in our community who was asked about, getting involved in some of the anti-fascist work, and they were like, "Yeah, that's not really my fight. That's not what I'm focused on, right?" And I want to say, in no uncertain terms and very strongly, it absolutely is your fight. All of this is our fight because it is all connected. Um, I've been to a few conferences in the last couple of years, and one point keeps getting hammered home time and time again. Nobody that we really need to be working on this climate stuff, is going to work on the climate stuff until their basic needs are met. And so I want to highly encourage this group of humans, everybody on this call, everybody watching this video, to get involved in issues that might seem to you tangential, but they are 100% necessary to tackle. That means like the healthcare stuff, the living wage stuff, all of that is a precursor to getting more people involved in climate work. They're not going to show up. They're not going to make the calls. They're not going to write the emails. They're not going to go to the public meetings. They're not going to do it until they have like a life that they can step away from. And it's like things are taken care of. So I really want to encourage you all as you think about broadening the tent and making the Seville 100, for example, closer to 100. A lot of those groups that should be in this coalition do not have climate in their name, and that's a good thing, right? The more you can bring people into this, the more people can support each other in being a part of this fight in a meaningful way. I am super excited to hear about some of the youth and college engagement that you all are engaged in right now. I think that's super important work. The youth are they're gonna carry this ball down the field, and so I want to encourage you to keep that going. The last thing I'll say is, and this was a really important takeaway for me. I mentioned earlier that, we plan to get $400,000 a year for the next few years for the climate program. The 100,000 was already coming, but the 300, that took a fight from you all, from the climate community to get in front of the board time and time again a couple of years ago and say, we need more, we need more, we need more. And it worked. It was a huge success story, right? To go from zero, which was planned, to 300 in a tight budget environment. To put that in context, with last week's board meeting, the board chair was talking about how affordability, housing affordability, which is a climate issue, by the way, that is a crisis for our community. That is a crisis. And the board is trying to put its money where its mouth is to address the crisis. It's putting $7 million into affordable housing efforts right now. Compare those two numbers, and it is clear that climate is not a crisis for the board. And I would make the closing argument to you all today that that's the work of community engagement, is to make it clear that this is a crisis. It is, as you may have heard in other circles, a poly crisis. There are lots of crises at the same time, but this needs to be counted as part of that. And that's the only way we're going to get the authorization to do the things we need to do, to get the funding, the creativity, the innovation to do the things that we need to do to reach our targets in 2015. I think I'll close it there. Thanks all.